Okay, I'm going to talk today to you about breaking market constraints. I'll try to put you on sync. We'll skip over this slide. You can look at this later if you get interested in that subject matter. But the point that Ellie made, I think, was a good one, that either companies today have the capacity to produce more and are just stopped from producing more by selling not enough, at least from their point of view, or quickly they add some TOC to their operation to increase their results, or their capacity rather, so that they can produce more. So the real issue then for almost all companies is to how to exploit that market constraint. I think that Alejandro is going to go after me, and I think we're going to say, maybe mine's going to lead right into his, which is clever arrangement by the management here. So these are different ways you might go to market. And if you do any of these, with perhaps except for this one, then this presentation is not for you. This presentation is if your company or the company that you work for or work on tries to use a sales force in order to exploit the market constraint. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I think this is obvious. There are difficulties with any sales force. No matter how good and productive they are, they have their difficulties. And yet we tend not to change away from this approach. It's really a long-lived approach. It's lasted for quite a long time. We've had this extraordinary explosion in division of labor in manufacturing. All kinds of production mechanisms are so much faster, hundreds and thousands of times faster, but we don't educate people much better than we ever did before. We don't sell much better than we ever did before. So this is a way to look into that. So the steps that we might have, just moving right through, you want more sales, so you hire more salespeople. The salespeople get some sort of sink or swim version of training, and they start to do something that as you look at them, it looks like it might be selling, and so you get distracted and go do something else. And that's kind of the normal routine, because the workload on any manager of any business, as Ellie pointed out, is constrained by management attention. So, of course, we want to move on to something else. This is a problem we have. We wanted more sales. We've done what we need to do to fix it, and we're going to move on. So, what's the problem? The next several slides will be, and most of the presentation is about what's the problem. So I'm going to talk about that, and I'm hoping Alejandro will talk about what to do on the solution side, because I'm light on that. Here's the first problem that I see for people in this mode, and that is that 2/3 of the time you fail. When you hire a new salesperson, 2/3 of the time that person doesn't work out, and my definition of doesn't work out is 5 years later they don't work for you anymore. 1/3 work out, at least to some extent, and good enough to keep them around. So, and then later on there's a second branch where the ones that worked out, one group stalls out too low. In other words, you're not satisfied with the level of throughput they produce. Whereas the other side goes ahead and may even surprise you on the optimistic or the positive side. So to review, we've got a pie chart. 2/3 of the time you screw up when you hire somebody, and half of the time that you didn't screw up, it's really good, and the other time it's only average, which is not very inspiring for people that think the TOC way and think that maybe things could be significantly better. I'm going to start with an example to maybe clarify a little more for you what I mean, and to give you the example, I think it'll give you a richer understanding. We've got a distribution company. It sells to business. Salespeople get a commission. In this particular case, I use a commission of 30% of the throughput. So the third condition is you want to grow. Because of that, when you assign these new salespeople, you don't give them very much in the way of existing accounts. In other words, they're supposed to develop new accounts on their own, new business that you didn't have before, and consequently, the accounts don't generate enough commission for them to live on. So you can see the cloud here. Pay more to get a really good salesperson, pay less in order to incent the salesperson to grow. So as some sort of compromise in between, we pay a draw against future commissions, whereby in the future the salesperson who becomes successful earns more commissions and pays back the money that you advanced to him or her as they were not making enough money at the beginning. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So, and again, because the salesperson is paid like a profit center, they've got to do their own planning, marketing, prospecting, appointment setting, travel. I got to switch the other hand. Presentations, proposals, quotations, sourcing, and problem solving. I now run out of fingers on my both hands, so I'll keep them up. I'll wiggle my head for customer service, and I mean external customer service that they do on site at the customer's place, because we got presumably internal customer service to handle the other type. Relationship building, and when necessary, collections. So this is the lucky 13. I fortunately have enough appendages to get that message across. And like a chain, it's only as strong as the weakest link. So a really brilliant salesperson in 7 of these 13 areas could stall out and fail. And this is a really difficult situation. You've got to ask yourselves, why do we ask people to do this? Why do we expect this to happen? So I came up with a narrative, if you will, of these different salespeople. You can't read all this, but if this is of any interest to you at all, then go back later and look at this. You can see this slide, but let me replace it with a chart. So here's throughput generated by a salesperson. It comes up to a peak and never hits the peak again. I see this over and over again. That's the good one. Let's take a look at the average guy. Again, same sort of narrative. And here's the average salesperson. Here's the throughput here. And he kind of goes up and down, but he hits, there's some sort of ceiling, a capacity ceiling he can't get through. He can't generate more throughput than he can generate. Here's the bad one. He kind of peters out kind of early in the 32-year career. What's happening to this guy, in case this isn't obvious, is the bad salesperson takes a while to get going. It doesn't mean he will be bad in the end. It just means it takes him a while to get going. Timeline goes along. He's taking money, extra money against future commissions, and that time period is extended. And then, let me come over here to the timeline. Then the guy, starts to earn more than his base commission, and so he has to pay back the money that he borrowed before. And during this time, it seems grossly unfair to him or her that they should be earning less than they're really producing. They forget that over here they liked it fine, but in any case, it's a bad disincentive. It doesn't work on the one end and it doesn't work on the other. It doesn't hurry them up to make them perform, and it doesn't work well in the end. So here's a comparison between the good and the average. Let's forget about the bad guys. We're going to have some of those. We don't know what to do about it. The clear change between these two, and if my presentation today is unpersuasive, in other words, you want to retain your inertia, then here's a piece of advice for you. The difference is the number of customers that these salespeople undertake. And saying grace over this many, 150 different customers, completely wipes out the salesperson's time. It's all tending or farming and no hunting, no bringing in new accounts. And that's the same thing, by the way. The number of salespeople, the number of customers is always the thing that causes this stagnation. So, and it's because he has soup to nuts responsibilities. So, as they exhaust their capacity, the production of tea trails off. And why in the heck would the capacity ever be consumed? Well, we know they've got to do some work for which they're ill-suited. I'm not saying they can't do it. They may intend to and they may want to do it, but they just don't like to do it. They may delay, they may put it off. You see this in prospecting. I love to get a new account. I go after them like crazy. I win a lot of the leads that I get, but I don't generate new leads. And so I have big dry spells. It happens a lot in consulting. People love delivering the projects, but they don't like continuing to keep the pipeline up to keep new projects coming in. And then the bad multitasking, as we just talked about in the last presentation. They've got 13 different jobs. They switch between them, and everybody can change their priorities. They can change them. Outside changes from internal or external sources. So they suffer enormously from bad multitasking. I said, okay, well, let me build this thing up for a whole company, and the one way I have to figure out how to get some idea of what kind of salesperson I hired based by chance for my simulation. So I decided I could roll a die. And 1 through 4 gives me a bad salesperson. I get an average for a 5, and only if I roll a 6 do I get a good salesperson. So I try that. Here's what it looks like. My first company was bad, bad, average, and the company failed. I was like, oh, well, that's not so good. 7% chance of having that outcome. Same 7% chance of getting the next one, which is bad, good, bad. Company also failed. I get a bad, bad, bad. Well, you know what's going to happen there. If the first two don't make it, this one's not making it either. But I've got a huge 30% chance of having that roll. So I get the average bad, average bad, which is kind of better than I had up here. I've got two people who I would actually keep, but it's not enough. Company's gone again. I get another good, bad, bad, and another bad, 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 and the company fails. And then finally on my seventh roll, I get lucky. I got one of each. I get a good and an average and a bad, and the company survived. I'll tell you a funny story here in a minute. But so from this auspicious start that I finally got, in year two, I had enough money and accumulated profits and cash and so forth to add another salesperson. And by insane stroke of luck, I get a good one. And in year four, I added another one, and now I'm hysterically out of control. I mean, this can't happen. What happened to me cannot happen, right? Of course, it does happen, but it can't. And multiply 17% times 17% times 2% to figure out what's the chance of getting this is your first five groups. So I've got three good guys, an average one, and a bad one at this point. And I'm still suffering with the bad one because I haven't really given up on him, and I don't want to go through the process of hiring a new one because 2/3 of the time it doesn't work. And half of the times it doesn't work in a way I really like, but I'm too lazy to do something about it. Okay, so move on. Here's the company for the first 6 years. And I just simulated out with that group of salespeople using the same narratives I did before. I just kind of patched these things together. And by the way, if you want the spreadsheet, you can ask me. I've got them out on Dropbox and you can download them. But here's the first years. You can see the key thing I think I want to point out here is over in the net profit column. It does go up, but it goes up in a very lumpy fashion. Here we're 353, but then we're back down to 148, which was worse than it was in year three. It's that kind of unusual variation that I see a lot in conventionally run companies, and I saw it here in my simulation. What I'm doing, by the way, is I'm assuming that in any given year, I could have 0 to 2% additional operating expense more than the baseline operating expense that I budgeted for. And that could be bad debt, a bankruptcy. It could be salesman leaves and takes some customers with him. It could be I found some inventory that nobody wants anymore and I had to write it off and throw it away. So there are all kinds of things that do happen to all kinds of companies, and that's why the fluctuating results. So I go out 50 years with my simulations, and I've got it so I press F9 to calculate the spreadsheet, and it does that random sample on the operating expense, the 0 to 2% extra every year, and so I get different pictures. So here's different examples of this simulation over, and you can do it. You press the button as many times as you want once you get the spreadsheet. It's fun. So all the way through here, I'm adding new salespeople whenever I think I can afford it. I'm recalculating the spreadsheet as I mentioned, and I've got this random fluctuation as I've already told you. Here's throughput going up here over time. That's just fixed according to how I added new people. But you can see net profit, which I'm showing in the green, and that is green in case you can't see, fluctuates wildly. And it calls into question, what's the problem? All my slides for the last 25 slides have been, what's the problem? You can look at these charts and say, yeah, this is good. What's the problem? Which is really a direction to why the problem isn't solved, is that it doesn't look like one. We have many things in TOC where people think there's not a problem. I don't have that problem. But this is not necessarily recognized by anybody as being an UDI or having, although dealing with 20 salespeople might be an UDI, but that's this slide. The problem I'm seeing with this is that the OE is growing a little faster. The complexity of managing this herd of cats. It keeps the net profit from coming up and through the throughput line. I would see that if T were growing faster than OE. And I've got this huge early mortality rate in my simulation. Remember, the first 6 companies just went away. So back to this slide again. We're going to revisit this some more. I want to talk a little bit about what I think goes wrong in this. And Justin Rolfe Marsh talks about this a lot in his presentations. But what would it take to do all those things well? And so I started thinking from a personality standpoint, what would be necessary? So for the problem solving, you might want a venturer, somebody who is self-motivated, sees the future, can move towards that future, has some sense of urgency, will follow the company's rules a little bit, but be creative in figuring out how to get things done. The planning, I might want a more scientific person, somebody who designs an experiment, tests the experiment, adjusts the results, and so forth, and goes on from there. Marketing, I like a creative analytical person, somebody who really suffers over the company's point of view and the customer's point of view and tries to resolve and come up with a really good answer. And it's an important question, so coming up with a good answer would be very good. An informal expert for customer service. And what I mean is expert because customers are calling customer service people asking questions. And informal because we don't know what questions they're going to ask. So they got to be able to roll with the punches a little bit. The diligence pattern for the travel, it's just work. Controlling personality for the appointment setting. Scientific might also work for prospecting. The promotional person for making the presentations. Think about how valuable it is to influence people, not necessarily with logic, but persuasively. This is the thing that draws people in. These are what actors have. And think how much actors make for making movies or television shows or things like that. This is an important part. But it's totally different from these more analytical areas of the scientific or the venture, for example. A craftsman does the proposals, an operational person does the collections, a specialist, a real domain expert does the quotations, get the right products on the list so that we are quoting the things we should quote to look as good as we can compared to the competitors. Sourcing might be done by the same person. But my point is that why do we imagine any one person could do all this? It's really crazy. I'm now challenging, and this is red if you can't notice it, the salesperson is paid like a profit center. Seems to me that might be the place where I start to look not for the problem, but the direction for the solution. So why are they paid like a profit center? Well, the first one, because my dad and his dad did it that way. Since we're down in Tennessee, I got to wonder whether or not really, I know how smart my dad was, but his dad might have been smarter than that, but I mean, nevertheless. The second one, we've got to pay. We have unlimited pay to really attract the best players, and this is a really good argument to pay for performance. In other words, but we only really have to pay for the performance because we've asked them to do an impossible job. So the last one, or the third one rather, because it wouldn't be fair to pay them so much unless they self-manage, and that's really the argument that the company doesn't earn 30% of the throughput itself in this model, just a small fraction of that. So the salespeople as a group are being paid more than the company's being paid. So therefore, the company really doesn't have the residual funds to invest in supporting them to a greater extent. And the problem with it is that it's not causing them to be aligned holistically. In other words, they have tantrums with the customer service person, and we put up with those. They sell to people that can't pay their bills because they get their commission either way. Maybe you can stop that one by saying we're not going to pay the commission until they pay their bills. But then you don't give them the reward for the work that they do close to when the action happens. If we're trying to say they're trainable, we want to put the reward close to the success. So these are types of things that happen. Also because it gives them the incentive to grow throughput. Oh, really? Well, then why do they all stall out? At some level, they all stall out. Yet the incentive still remains for them to move ahead. And I'm suggesting that not only should salespeople not be paid as profit centers, companies should evolve away from salespeople altogether. And so let me tell you some of the reasons why. Well, first, I want to align everybody in the company towards exploiting the constraint. And I like to have the type of people that the HR department can find looking for jobs to be qualified to do the jobs that I have inside my company. I don't need wizards. I don't need arrogant brilliance. just regular people will do. Come in, you can be successful in our company. So that people aren't saddled. I haven't asked these salespeople to do jobs that they despise or that they can't do very well. They're no good at. Once they get up to a certain level, this sort of global purpose that getting our packaging equipment out, as Adam and I frequently say to people, it seems like life and death to the people at Little Shipper Supply. It's a strange thing. None of our customers think it's life and death, but we feel like it's life and death. And that motivation does not come from the individual. It's rather the group motivation to try to do a good job. It gets rid completely of the glass ceiling on throughput generation for the company and facilitates growing throughput much faster than OE. So, does this mean you got to fire all your salespeople? You better not, because the trust between the employees and the company are a crucial factor in the company's success. If you don't believe it, try it. You may win in the short term, but in the long term, you do not win. So we segregate the jobs based on the skill sets or the personality, not the functionality. And we fit the job descriptions to personalities that can do those rather than functionality, not the other way around. So let's start with the conventional company. We'll look at it in year one. What's the organizational chart look like in year one? And then we're going to restructure it and move forwards again. And I'll close in on the end of this thing, and you can ask me questions. But you won't be able to read this, but look at this later when you get it. It tells what every person's salary is. Here there are 3 salespeople. This is the conventional company. A president making $85,000, a warehouse and a driver, a customer service person, somebody to do accounting work, payables, things like that. So this is year one, startup company. It makes $4,000. Pretty good. Okay, we actually made, is that the pointer? We actually made a little bit of money. In year two, we go to a 4th salesperson, a service tech, and an executive assistant because this guy's getting kind of busy. Because at this point it was 7. Now we've just gone to 10 direct reports for the president. And in year 3, we're added 2 more people. He's up to 12 people. Reporting directly to the president, is what I call the rake management structure. So there's a long pole and then a bunch of tines down at the bottom, right? I've been here. I've been this person. I got up to 14. You'll be glad to know. Before my lid finally blew. But this is a good, profitable company. It does better every year, right? This is success. We like this. It looks okay. This is the structure in year 3 for the division of labor company that I simulated. You can see it's a much richer organizational structure. It's not the rake style. There's some managers in here that are taking that load off. We've got a metrics maven to keep track of all the statistics about the company so we can see how it's performing. We got an operations division over here. We've got the scheduler and 3 presenters out talking to customers, and a marketing area over here trying to figure out what do we sell and to whom do we sell it. So the president's up there making $160,000 in this model in year 3, and in year 3, the net profit for this machine is more than all 3 years for the conventional company. But big problems. This is very hard to get to. And it's a reason, I think, why people don't get there. First off, it loses $70,000 the first year. In the first year, the president has the 1 scheduler and 1 presenter. They're working out of his garage. The president does the delivery work. The president does the accounts receivable. The president does the accounting. The president does everything other than making the appointments and scheduling and actually delivering the meetings to the customers. And he makes $20,000 a year for the year. That's year 1. And it still loses $70,000. Year 2, he loses $30,000. He's gotten himself a little bit of a raise, and he's added a new raises for all the people that he has under him. But his raise still doesn't get him up to the level of pay of theirs. So there's a real obstacle to getting to this one if you're doing it from a startup standpoint. Now, if you're doing it from an existing company standpoint, it might be a different story. We might be able to really do it from an existing company if we started to move to this kind of a structure. We just rearranged how we're spending our money. And the president's making 160 grand instead of 85 in year 3. So, and it just goes off from there to show you a picture of the next 17 years because it got silly after I kept going out past that. This is a $1 billion company in 17 years. The throughput, which is this light colored line, grows up to $250 million. The operating expense only goes up to $100 million, so it makes $150 million a year in year 17. And to put that in perspective, this arrow is pointing 50 years into the future, or actually, whatever, from 0 up to 50. At year 50, the conventional company got to $9 million in throughput after 50 years. That's the one we said didn't have any problems. That was good. Nothing wrong with that one. This one I think is actually manageable. It's straightforward, and I think this is a lot easier to do this, even though the results look incredible by comparison. I personally, I would suffer through those first 2 years to get this company. Now, the question that this presentation begs that I don't have time to answer, for which I apologize. I'm going to make a little bit of I'm going to throw you a bone, but nothing more than a bone. I'm sorry. Is how the heck do you incent people if you don't use money to do it? Because we've believed up to now that we can just tell people to do whatever we want them to do, and they'll do it. And if we pay them enough, they will get the answers that we want. But in other words, what we're saying is that we've got a guy pedaling the bike, which is attached to the grindstone wheel. And he does what he does for a job is he dips his head down and he grinds his nose on the grindstone, grinds it off. And we're saying, he says, boss, I don't feel that much incentive. I said, what if I paid you more? Would you grind your nose off even faster? I got feeling badly about that, right? I mean, it no longer feels tasty to me to ask him to say, oh yeah, I'll take that deal. Here, take another 50 grand. I mean, it started to bother me. My conscience got the best of me. So here's the thing that I've noticed, that if you take a survey of employees and they mention what keeps you at this job or why did you leave this job, either one, they're really kind of the two sides of the same coin. 6th on the list is pay. It's the number one means of motivating that we tend to use. I think there's another mistake there, and that's the other presentation, if I can get it straightened out. I think I've solved the problem, but I don't have the articulation right. But the first two are sort of basics. So pay people fairly. That's got to be understood to do it. The president who owns the company, I'm okay with him taking $20,000 a year, but he paid all of his employees more than he paid himself. That's okay. He's got the longer time span of attention. It doesn't bother him to suffer for 2 years. Building trust, that's key. The people that work for this president have to know the president's going to take care of them. They have to know that. And if you build that, you put enough deposits in that bank, then you can expect people to really help you when you need to make a withdrawal. The people have to enjoy their job. If you give them those two things, then suddenly they have some sort of higher motivations come into play. And that's the ones I've got listed 3, 4, and 5. Autonomy, mastery, and purpose. These are the reason why people play guitars and get good at that on their spare time, but nobody pays them except for maybe John, wherever John is. I don't know if do they pay you, John? No, yeah, see, right? It's not for the pay that you play the guitar or sing, right, in the band. We do these things to get good at them. We come to these conferences to get better at the TOC stuff that we love, regardless of whether it really pays us very well. We think it's the right thing to do. So this mastery that we're trying to build by being here, and this is what Ellie, I think, talked about, one of the inches of disharmony, is aligning responsibility and authority, the lieutenant's cloud. So if we let people do the things that they need to do, and we don't stand in their way by saying, have to ask me first, they get a lot more motivation. And you give them some sort of master purpose. It doesn't have to be something big. I mean, some people have huge visions of high-level purposes. But most people just go home and drink beer and watch television. And they don't need an extraordinarily inspiring purpose. They just need something to get behind that their other friends at work are behind too, and that makes a difference to them. And so if it's big, that's great, but it doesn't have to be big, is my point. So the answer is to pay people in these 5 coins, and you have to be very intentional about doing it. If you do that, then you'll have more and more capacity here to take care of them, maybe even a little super fairly, if you will. So I'm going to give you 2 sources of information, since I'm not going to talk any more about that. One of them is this wonderful presentation. Fred Kaufman is a brilliant thinker. He works for LinkedIn. They call him there's a corporate philosopher, I believe is what his title is. So he's talking here about the conflict between paying globally or paying locally. And I've never heard it expressed so well. I've never heard one person give such an impassioned argument for both sides of the cloud. But he does a beautiful job in this particular one, part 2 of 3. 1 of 3 and 3 of 3 are also good, but this one is the one that I wanted to point you to. And then Dan Pink's work, which consolidates a lot of research on human motivation and so forth, and this is sort of the real thing. The key thing about this is that by the time you get there, there'll be over 15 million views. This is one that a lot of people have looked at, and it's the one that talks about autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And that's all I've got for you today. Any questions? Sorry for talking so fast, but
Henry, you did this in your company?
Yes, as much as I can. That's exactly, Jerry asked, did I put this in my company? In every company, I kind of do this, I do it intentionally but unconsciously, Jerry, and I recognize as I try to write down what the heck I'm doing to create a strategy and tactics tree as a template to help Adam manage or to help other people who are managers who work for me. I'm trying to give them a mechanism or to put these things together so they have sufficiency to really lift their companies up.
So can you share a little bit of the story in your company, how long you've been doing it and what the results have been?
Yeah, I can. We have one of the problems we have, I'll tell you just a little snippets of the story. It's really a long story, and I won't try to get into all of it, but one of the problems we had was we were worried about the salespeople just being lone wolves and going off and doing their own thing and not necessarily exploiting the constraint. So Adam and I decided after a lot of gnashing of teeth, and this really was years-long gnashing of teeth. You can worry about this for a long time before you do it. But we decided to take the salespeople off of commission. They were all on straight commission. Surprise, it was at 30% of the throughput. We were all on straight commission, and here we are. We take them all off. We didn't cut anybody's pay. We just paid them a salary that was the same as their commission had been looking back for the last few years. As soon as we finished that, we started to raise prices to our customers. And we found we couldn't raise prices before because the same incentive that was supposed to make them generate more throughput made them so afraid when they sell the bill 43 different items and they have to raise the price of the toothpicks. And Bill says, I don't take any price increases on toothpicks. Boy, and I'll take away all those other 42 items too if you raise the price on toothpicks. They shake like that. They're so scared to lose the commission they're already getting on the other 42 items that they don't raise the price of toothpicks. And very shortly, you would be surprised, but toothpicks which you buy for $2.16, you sell for $1.98. And we're literally losing money because we're too scared to raise customers' prices. And so we stopped all that. We raised prices, I want to say, 24 or 5% of our throughput was increased strictly by price increases, and our plan was to lose 10% of our customers in that. So get a little bit, 90% of the workload, but 125% of the throughput on that 90%, whatever the math works out to, maybe a 20% increase in throughput. We lost no customers, 0 customers. They did not care that we raised the prices. The value proposition was there. We were doing a good job, and we couldn't get there when we had this sea of salespeople. And we really did have 20. Over time, I let that reduce down just by natural attrition. And I got down to the point where I was only 4 salespeople. So that was the point when I actually switched them off of commission. But that's one anecdote. Profitability went through the roof. Now we're building the sales machine with the presenter and the scheduler to call and schedule the presenter's time, and we're delivering our Mafia offer again, which was we called ESP, which is a vendor managed inventory program, where we say if you want to buy from us, that's fine. If we ever let you run out, we pay $1,000 penalty per day until you're back in stock, and this is on $40 items. So, it's not like you got the item free. It wasn't that kind of it's not like Federal Express where you absolutely positively have to have it in California, so you send the letter overnight and it gets there 3 days later, and it's too late to submit the bid because there was a deadline. And you said, well, you said it absolutely positively, so I used you. And they said, well, I'll tell you what, we'll charge you for the 3-day service. That's not a guarantee, in my mind.
What's a presenter?
A presenter is a person who stands in front of a customer, a group of customer people, maybe it could be a single person or a team on the customer side, and presents the Mafia offer. So, and I'm careful to call it a presenter because it's no longer a salesman. I mean, that's the one that looks the most like what we think of in our head as a salesperson, but that salesperson is not doing that work except for maybe 2 or 3% of the time. We were looking at meaningful sales conversations with customers that were doing maybe two or something like that a week as a company with 4 people. That's as much as they were getting around to making actual new business pitches. Now we do new business pitches, more than that every day. So, any other questions? Okay, thank you.